Hello everyone! You might remember that a few months ago, or closer to a year ago now, I did a video where I rattled off all the books that I read in school that I could remember from 1st grade through 8th grade. The list was comprised exclusively of books that I read in school, that were assigned to me, that were read to me when I was very little, books that I chose for book reports and summer reading books. I believe that at the end of that video, I promised a follow-up, and here it is. Not a list of all the books that I read outside of school, because that would take years to cover, but a list of books that I read in grades 9 through 12. So, here we go. I hope that I haven't forgotten anything. For summer reading going into 9th grade, we had a list of books to choose from. I think we had to pick 1 nonfiction book and 2 fiction books, and here's what I chose. First, Into Thin Air, a personal account of the Mount Everest disaster by Jon Krakauer, which is Krakauer's version of events revolving around the deadly 1996 climbing catastrophe. This was not my first introduction to that event. A few years prior, I had seen a TV movie about it. In fact, the TV movie was an adaptation of Krakauer's book. It was titled Into Thin Air, Death on Everest. I liked the movie, I found the story kind of captivating, and that's why I picked this book, which I ended up enjoying a lot. Now, Krakauer's account is not without bias. He was there, he was close to some people on the trek up the mountain, he was not close with some other people, and something I've learned as I've studied this event more is that in discussions of that disaster, there's a tendency to point fingers. Krakauer participates in that, therefore his account has always been somewhat controversial. It's a good book. It taught me the meaning of the word hubris, and I cried while reading it. But I would say that if you have a special interest in this particular awful incident, as I do, I recommend looking into other accounts in addition to Krakauer's. The second summer reading book I chose was The Once and Future King by T.H. White, a retelling of Arthurian legend which has become a modern classic. I remember my feelings for this one being all over the place. I've never been into this kind of fantasy, and I've never been into this time period, and I've never been into King Arthur and Camelot and the Knights of the Round Table and all of that. But there were elements I recognized, although I'm sure that there was a lot that went over my head with regard to references and settings and characterizations, etc. I enjoyed the first section, and there was one chapter that I loved because it was so funny. It's the part with the birds where Wart has been turned into a hawk and he's among the other hawks. I think Archimedes is there too, and there was all this anachronistic language, and it was just so hilarious. But then the rest of the book was something completely different, and I found it kind of distasteful. I don't know. The incest thing put me off, even if it was an accident. I've never liked the Lancelot-Guinevere love story, the Lancelot-Guinevere-Arthur love triangle. I hate it. And I'm pretty sure that I found both Lancelot and Guinevere loathsome characters in this. And then it just turns into a conglomeration of intrigue and treachery and resentment and misery, and I ended up miserable reading it. It just wasn't for me. And the third book I chose was The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, a semi-autobiographical novel about a young woman's battle with mental illness and depression. I consider The Bell Jar a truly unforgettable book. That summer when I read it, totally on my own, without any guidance, without even knowing the author's tragic story, I saw the main character as a lost individual, someone drawn in contradictory directions, who felt disconnected from those around her and the expectations imposed on her, with the result that she just didn't want to do anything. She was apathetic, and then she became depressed. I didn't see her as someone with mental illness. I didn't see her as someone who had something wrong with her. In some ways, even at age 14, I felt I could relate to her and some of her struggles. While there were some parts of the book that I found quite humorous, the writing was funny. So it was kind of a shock to come to school then and kind of touch base with some other kids who had chosen to read it and find that they didn't have quite the same take on it that I did. Or if they did, they didn't confess it, which is not that surprising. Teenagers aren't really inclined to spill their guts about how a summer reading book made them feel or, what it made them think about. I remember for a while wondering if my reaction to the book and the character was an indication that there was something wrong with me. I don't think that I misunderstood the book, though. I think perhaps some of the other kids did, and I have come to understand that it's her relatability that gives the book its power, that makes it resonate with the reader. So now that we've gotten those three out of the way, I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit more. I'm not going to say as much about the stuff we read in class. A lot of it I just don't have clear memories of, whereas my memories of those three books have always stuck with me. So we're going to fast track some of this, or else we'll be here forever. We read The Odyssey by Homer, which I thought was okay. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. There were some parts of it I liked. I had to read it again in college, and I liked it better, but I preferred the Iliad, which the Odyssey is a sequel to. I don't really remember our class discussions about the Odyssey, but I do remember the class project that we had to do after we finished reading it. We had to make a movie based on the Odyssey. I wish that I could forget that ridiculous, embarrassing experience. Was it all bad? No, I guess not, because I spent a lot of the time that we were trying to film it laughing my head off. But the whole thing was absurd, and then we had to watch it in class with our classmates, and then we had to watch their movies, and they were all terrible, and there was I, Odysseus, with a mascara mustache on my face so that you could tell that I was a hurly-burly man. I should mention that to go along with the Odyssey, we read portions of Edith Hamilton's Mythology, Timeless Tales of Gods and Heroes in class. We read In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, the true crime classic. Considering I was really into murder mysteries at that age, and I had been for years, you would think that I liked it, but I didn't. I was reading detective novels. I wasn't reading true crime books written from the perspective of the criminal, and I don't think I liked the way it was written. I didn't like the characters, which is, I don't think you're supposed to. I do believe that there's some debate about that, that part of what made the book provocative was that you do kind of see things from their eyes, and I don't think you feel sympathetic for them, but you come to a point of understanding, and that did not happen for me, though. I didn't like the characters, I didn't like the story, I didn't like what was happening, and I didn't want to read it. We read Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and I believe that was my first real experience reading Shakespeare, and I enjoyed the language, and the discovery that, hey, this isn't totally incomprehensible to me. There were some lines that I latched onto. I really liked the insult, green sickness carrion, and of the famous lines that we had to memorize, a couple of my favorites were Romeo's "Why she doth teach the torches to burn bright," and Friar Lawrence's wisely and slow they stumble that run fast, which I view as the moral of the whole thing. While I like the language, and there are some beautiful speeches in there, I don't actually like Romeo and Juliet, the story, that much. It's not one of my favorite plays. I don't really view it as a romantic tragedy. I see it as a story about two teenagers who are reckless and immature, who make bad choices and end up dead. Do the adults get off scot-free? No, they don't. But I don't have much fondness for Romeo and Juliet. And when someone describes another story as a Romeo and Juliet kind of tale, I feel like, no thanks. We read The Chocolate War by Robert Cormier, which I hated. I disliked it so much that I made a list of 23 reasons why I hated The Chocolate War. And my teacher saw that list. I didn't intend to show him, but he was walking around and my friend was looking at it and he said, "Oh, what's this?" So I showed it to him and I think he was amused. I don't think he minded. I think that he was happy that he was getting some kind of enthusiastic response to the assigned reading, even if it was negative. Part of me has wondered since if he was offended on some level, since he taught the book to multiple classes every single year. I would think he must have liked it a little, but he didn't say anything. We read Go Ask Alice, which is presented as an anonymous publication, but was written by Beatrice Sparks. I didn't really like Go Ask Alice either, although I appreciated its cautionary "don't do drugs, kids" message. We read To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This was a reread for me, and I did like it. I haven't been mentioning it, but we did watch some movies in this class. We watched a movie based on the Odyssey after we read that. We watched the Franco Zeffirelli Romeo and Juliet film after we finished that, and we watched To Kill a Mockingbird in class. Unfortunately, we had to break it up over 3 or maybe even 4 class periods, which is a shame. That's no way to watch any movie, but especially not the way to watch a classic like that. We read The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, which I think might have been a reread for me. I'm not sure because I know that I had read portions of it before, but I'm not sure that I'd read the whole thing. I had seen 2 movies multiple times. The Diary of a Young Girl is something that I recognize was not intended for publication. And I feel like I can't express any criticism of the writing because of what it is. Yet, there are parts of it, not all of it, but some of it, that I just don't feel a lot of interest in because it's a teenage girl's diary, and it sounds like it. I wouldn't normally be reading something like that. But then there are the other parts. Her perceptive observations and her chronicling of life in the secret annex and the tensions among the people there. And then the tragedy and horror of knowing how it all turns out. Those are the things that give it profound significance, and that's why we read it. We read Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. That was a reread for me. I like Of Mice and Men. I find it a very pungent, direct novel, and sad, obviously. I've almost always been familiar with the story because I saw the 1992 adaptation with Gary Sinise and John Malkovich many times as a kid. I believe that Gary Sinise also directed that movie. It's a great adaptation. I consider it very underrated. Also great is the 1939 movie with Burgess Meredith and Lon Chaney Jr. I don't think either version gets the credit that it deserves. I think we read Oedipus Rex, the play by Sophocles, in class, and then right at the end of the year, we started reading Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, but we didn't finish it. I don't remember how far we got. I'm not sure that we even got to the assassination. We started with, I don't know, a week and a half of school left to go. Didn't make it to the end in time, and it was very disappointing. I really like Julius Caesar. I think it's not a perfect play, but it's got some really great lines in it. I think well, I don't know if it's my favorite line, but it's the one that I quote a lot to myself. I don't just say this in random conversation. I have said this in conversation before. Jan Cassius has a lean and hungry look. He reads too much. Such men are dangerous. I love the structure of Mark Antony's speech. The friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears speech, where he comes out there and says, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. So don't come at me, all you guys who are, you got the blood on your hands and you just taken out the tyrant, and I'm his buddy, and you're afraid that I'm going to accuse you, but I'm not going to, except he does, because he questions, was Caesar really a tyrant? Brutus said this, and Brutus said that. Was it really true? Brutus is an honorable man. That is a refrain that he says constantly through this speech. Brutus did this, but Brutus is an honorable man, and just calls into question the whole notion of honor, and that's really the main meat of the play. Anyway, I'm not doing a class on Julius Caesar right now. I really like Julius Caesar. I like it so much more than Romeo and Juliet. We did have to do an oral book report that year, and because that was the year that I became obsessed with The Phantom of the Opera, I chose to do my report on Phantom by Susan Kay. Maybe you thought I was going to say The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, but I had already read that at least 3 times, and we were supposed to pick something we hadn't read before. Our teacher didn't really give us any structure for the speech, and he didn't impose a time limit. So I talked about that book in what was probably a nauseating amount of detail for about 25 minutes, and I'm sure it was very boring for my fellow classmates. But as far as Phantom goes, which is basically glorified fan fiction, I believe I was a lot more positive about it then than I am now. I feel now that Kay does some interesting things with the story. She takes it in some interesting directions. She explores some neat concepts and adds some more humor and some romance. But there's an equal number of things that she did that I didn't like at all. And so on the whole, I can do without it. I believe I read it twice, possibly 3 times, and by the 3rd time, I felt like, I don't need this. It should also be taken into consideration that at that time, I was 15, and I was at my most hyper point of the Phantom of the Opera obsession. And I'm beyond that now. I still like the Phantom of the Opera, and I still get excited to talk about it, but I am nowhere near obsessed anymore. And, through conversations with other fans, I kind of realized how much my ardor had mellowed. I think just in general, my days of getting obsessed with something or someone are beyond me. And I think that's healthy. Going into 10th grade, we were again given a list of summer reading books that we had to choose from. I think this time we had to pick 2 books, and I chose East of Eden by John Steinbeck, a book that I found kind of shocking, and also much longer than I had expected. I had read The Pearl and of Mice and Men, both very short books, and then East of Eden is kind of an epic. So there were a few things that made me feel like, wow, I got more than I bargained for with this. And I chose The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon by Stephen King, which I unexpectedly liked. I think that was my first time reading a Stephen King book, and I was apprehensive about it. I was surprised that it was even on the summer reading list, because it's an outlier that was sticking out like a sore thumb among all of the tried and true, oh, I have to read this for school kinds of books. But I chose it, telling myself, yeah, I might read the first couple chapters and then decide, nope, this is too scary, too evil, and then I'll just pick something else. But it's actually a survival story, not a horror story. It has frightening elements, but it's what's going on is not what you might think is going on. I'm not gonna discuss spoilers or anything. It's a survival story, though, and it turned out to be a good choice for me. I believe it's not held in high esteem by King fans, but that's probably because it's so far from the norm that when it came out, I imagine his usual readers, expecting to be terrified, were disappointed. But I wasn't. I was actually relieved. As a class, we read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which I like a lot. I liked it even better after I read it a second time in college. I have written a paper on every single main character, starting with Roger Chillingworth, the villain, and then I wrote a paper on Arthur Dimmesdale, one on Hester Prynne, one on Pearl, and then I also wrote a paper on symbolism and a paper that was more thematic. And at least one of those papers was voluntary, where I was, write a paper on a book that uses this, or take one of the books that we read this year and write a paper on it. And I chose The Scarlet Letter. Not everybody likes it. I've heard a lot of people complain about having to read it, and that's fine. I get it. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think it's great. I do see people more and more frequently read into it. I think there's a modern tendency to try to make it say something that was never Hawthorne's intention, but that's another matter. Sometime after that, in kind of a related vein, we read The Crucible by Arthur Miller. My senior year, the drama club performed The Crucible, and a bunch of my friends were in it, and I helped them rehearse and practice their lines, which was a lot of fun, without any of the pressure of actually having to go on stage myself. And so, while I do kind of remember going through it in 10th grade, what I remember more is going over it again myself, especially certain lines over and over, in 12th grade. We read Our Town by Thornton Wilder, another play, another American classic. If you haven't picked up on it yet, 10th grade was very clearly focused on American literature. I don't know what 9th grade was. We were all over the place. I guess I liked Our Town. I didn't dislike it. Maybe I should say that. We read The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I didn't have as much appreciation for it then as I would come to have later. I think I didn't know what to expect from this incredibly famous title that I'd heard so much about. Not that I heard people raving about the book, but it was one of those things like, ooh, The Great Gatsby. And then when I finally had got my assignment to read it, it was like, this is what it's all about? It's just about a rich guy who's pining for the girl that he used to be with, and she's married now, and there are all these crazy people who come over and have crazy parties, and then somebody, just gets kind of messy, and the green light, all of that. What's all the fuss about? but I gained a new appreciation for it in a couple of years. We read The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, which, again, I had heard so much about, not necessarily good things. Like The Scarlet Letter and The Great Gatsby, it's kind of the butt of people's jokes. Oh, did you read this in school? Yep, what'd you think? I hated it. Me too. I wasn't liking The Catcher in the Rye. I couldn't see the point until suddenly it clicked. I reached a certain part, the part where it sounds cliche, but it's the part where he talks about the catcher in the rye, but specifically his little sister, and you realize the relevance of the title, and it was like the light bulb went on, and I understood the point, and I had a sudden liking for the main character, Holden Caulfield, and I suddenly appreciated what the book was doing, what it was saying, in a way I hadn't before, and everything fell into place. We read I Am the Cheese by Robert Cormier. Now, Robert Cormier had written The Chocolate War, which I had hated so much the year before, and when I found out that I had to read another book by the same author, I was not happy, but as it turns out, I liked I Am the Cheese much better. It's like a thriller, almost. I don't exactly remember the story, but the format and the storytelling and the plot was just totally different, and I liked it, and I was stunned that I liked it. I also saw someone do a one-man performance of I Am the Cheese once, and it was really good. We read Night Shift, which is a collection of short stories by Stephen King. I suspected that my teacher might be a Stephen King fan, but he never said anything, and I never asked. I did think it pretty odd that we read a Stephen King book, and there was also a Stephen King book snuck onto the summer reading list. I liked some of the stories in the collection, not all of them. That's pretty representative of how I feel about Stephen King in general. We read Ordinary People by Judith Guest, and for some reason I have a very hard time remembering anything about it. It's about a teenage boy caught in the middle of a divorce, I think, and I seem to recall that we also watched the movie in class, but I don't remember that either. And we read one more classic American play, 12 Angry Men by Reginald Rose. I think we read the whole thing in class, and then we watched the movie, which is great, of course. 11th grade, my junior year, I took AP English, specifically AP Language and Composition. And the teacher was the same teacher that I had for English in 9th grade. I can't imagine that we really only had to do one book for summer reading, but I can only remember one, and that was The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. I was already somewhat familiar with the story because I had seen the 2003 TV miniseries with Ciarán Hinds, so I knew what I was in for. It's a terrible story, but an effective one. I think I did like the book. That's the thing about Thomas Hardy. So many of his stories are just dreadful, but they're so well written and well structured that you have to admire them. It's depressing, but it's a very engrossing tale. This class was AP Language and Composition, but it was also a British literature course, which is what all the other 11th graders were doing. So we started the year with Beowulf, which I can't say I enjoyed much. I liked it much better a few years later when I read it again in college, with a better translation and a better teacher. And then to get the flip side of the coin in this class, we read Grendel by John Gardner, which is not British literature, but it's a retelling of Beowulf from the monster's perspective. It's kind of a precursor to what became a huge fad in the last 20 years or so, retelling a well-known story from the villain's perspective and making that villain sympathetic. I didn't care a whole lot for Grendel. You know, it's funny. English was always my favorite subject, always my favorite class, and yet I didn't like a lot of the books that I had to read in school. We read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which I didn't really like. We read the selections from the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, which I didn't really like. We read Macbeth by William Shakespeare. Now that I liked. I think I had actually read it already on my own, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I might have just read the Cliff's Notes or something. But Macbeth is awesome. I had no complaint with that. We read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. That was also a reread for me. Great Expectations is fine and all, but it's not my favorite Dickens, not even close. And yet it's the only Dickens that some people know besides A Christmas Carol, and that's too bad, because I don't have any beef with Great Expectations. It's a great story, good characters, great twist, ironic twist, but, I don't know, they're just other Dickens books that I like better, that I enjoy the writing more, I enjoy the characters more, and the relationships. I just find Great Expectations both dreary and kind of cliche. Not cliche, but I'm too familiar with it. It's been overdone now. So, yeah. Fun fact, this class being taught by the same teacher who I had in 9th grade, who had us make a movie based on the Odyssey. At the end of the year, the whole class had to film a movie that featured characters from all the books we had read. So, once again, I had to be in a movie, and I was kind of hoping to play Lady Macbeth, or Lady Macduff, or maybe Miss Havisham, but instead, I got stuck with Pip. The characters were split into teams competing for something. I don't know. I think we were playing Survivor. I'm not sure. My scene was a marshmallow eating contest with Grendel. I don't even like marshmallows that much. We read Animal Farm by George Orwell. That I liked much more than I expected to. Speaking strictly in terms of enjoyment, I prefer Animal Farm over 1984. I find it a more engaging read. I like the characters better. It doesn't give me a headache. 1984 is one of those books where it's profound and important and relevant, and the concepts are just real zingers, and it's got famous lines and names for things and all of that, but I didn't actually like the book that much. I didn't enjoy reading it. It definitely, in my mind, just for pure entertainment, is inferior to Animal Farm, which I found much more dynamic. And we also read And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This was not just a reread for me, this was probably my 6th or 7th time reading the book at least. I've probably reread And Then There Were None more times than any other novel. I don't think that I gained anything by reading it in this class, but it was fun to hear what other kids thought along the way, what they suspected was really going on. We also had to do an oral book report, just like in 9th grade, only this time the book had to be a biography of a famous person, and we had to deliver our report as that famous person. I picked a book about Tchaikovsky by Herbert Weinstock because he's my favorite composer, and I knew that I'd be able to scrounge up a decent enough costume. That was the motivating factor behind 90% of my decisions when it came to stuff like this. If a character, whether it was a fictional character or a real person, was going to require an old-fashioned dress, that was pretty much a no-go, because we didn't have any of those lying around the house, and there wasn't anything that I'd be able to tweak and improvise to make seem like an old-fashioned dress. But suit jackets and ties, we had those in abundance. 12th grade was the other AP English class, AP Literature and Composition. Everybody else in 12th grade, I think, was doing a World Lit course, or they used to before this particular teacher came along. She had a different curriculum in mind, and so everything got kind of shaken up. For summer reading going into that year, we had to read 3 books, and they were all assigned. We had to read The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, which I found more distressing than anything else. I found it a very disturbing book. We read Life of Pi by Jan Martel, which I had already read on my own several years before, and I liked it. And we read A Doll's House, the play by Henrik Ibsen. I don't remember if I liked that or not. We didn't read as many books for class that year, probably because there was a lot of other stuff going on, but what we did read, we delved into more deeply than we had previous assigned literature. Surprisingly, the teacher had us all reread The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. A lot of people weren't happy about that, but I found it beneficial. I was 2 years older, 2 years wiser maybe, and I appreciated the story more. But more importantly, I began to appreciate the writing, how Fitzgerald used words and sentences and the sound of the words. That's what has really stuck with me over the years, is the sound of the language in The Great Gatsby. And I found out, reading other Fitzgerald stories and books, that he carried it through into other things as well. There are some passages in Tender as the Night that are just scrumptious. I still find The Great Gatsby a messy story, not in structure, but in content, but it's a good one. We read Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton, which I was fully prepared to dislike because I had older siblings who had read it and complained about it, but I liked it. Like Of Mice and Men, Ethan Frome is a short, compact novel that really packs a punch. Ugh. We read Hedda Gabler, another play by Henrik Ibsen. I felt like reading A Doll's House over the summer had been preparation for this, but it might have also just been a coincidence. We did not discuss A Doll's House in class at all. Hedda Gabler is a fun experience. Fun's probably not the right word to use. She's a fascinating character. She's intense, a manipulative woman, vindictive. I would say the crazy type that men should watch out for and stay as far away from as possible. But there are differing opinions on that. Others view her more sympathetically than I do. And we read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. That was probably my 3rd time reading Wuthering Heights, if I'm remembering correctly. It was interesting to read it not just for pleasure this time, but in an academic context, and I think I did gain something from that. I learned to appreciate more the structure of the book, the intricacy of the storytelling, and the characterizations. It wasn't just, these people are awful, they're awful to each other, and I can't believe how crazy this story is. There was a lot I came to appreciate about storytelling, about the writing, about the setting, about relationships and what they all mean and all of that. I am grateful, however, that I never had to read Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte for school, because I think my personal enjoyment of that might have been spoiled or dampened somehow, having to go through it in an academic setting. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. I wouldn't want to have it dissected like that. Granted, there are a lot of classics that, for me, have benefited from that process of dissection, but Jane Eyre, I don't want to do that. Now, unless I've forgotten something, those are all the books that I had to read for high school. I've left out short stories and poems, of course, because the video's long enough as it is, and I also couldn't possibly remember all the short stories and poems that I had to read. But I think I covered just about everything else. I will not be doing another one of these to talk about books I read in college. For personal reasons, I've decided to end this here. But I hope you enjoyed this video. It's been another fun little trip down memory lane for me, and I hope it was a similar experience for you. Please feel free to share what you had to read in high school in the comments below so that we can all compare notes, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.